morning and welcome to Dateline New Haven, WNHH-FM, New Haven's home for community radio. I'm Paul Bass, inviting you to look behind the headlines on the stories that make New Haven tick. Make New Haven tick, flood, pack an emergency bag, and hide for shelter while the gas tank is full. Yes, I'm talking about the era of climate change, where it used to be once every 10 or 20 years we'd have a monster storm that shut the city down and everyone's scared they'd lose power, wouldn't have water, might have to flee. Now it seems like it's every few weeks, potentially sometimes. And we're going to talk to a man on the front line of dealing with climate change in New Haven, how we're going to fix it short-term and long-term. His name is Giovanni Zinn. He's a city engineer. Giovanni, thanks so much for making time to come in today.
Hey, thank you, Paul, for having me on here. It's been a little bit, but I certainly have enjoyed being on the station, and brings me back to the days of Infrastructure Thursdays. With,
yes, we do that again.
Yes, we should.
You know, it's interesting. City engineer has always been an important job, and it's usually the person you never hear about. Now, would you agree that in the era of climate change, city engineer is an out front position that requires long extra hours about emergencies of flooding, short-term and long-term, how we're going to change with rising sea levels so the city doesn't flood, but also keep our grid up, how we're going to change to greener energy and all that?
Yeah, I think it's it is the critical question, certainly in our time here, on how do we deal with this existential threat that we caused ourselves. And it's something that certainly consumes a lot of our time and our thought, and it colors everything that we do. City government is often focused on short-term issues. What's the fire of the day? What's the next budget cycle? What's the next couple years? And we have this big existential threat, which is not only a giant problem now, but it's going to be an increasing problem as you go forward. The state of Connecticut's official forecast for sea level rise, for example, is up to 20 inches by 2050.
Our sea level is going to rise 20 inches to 2050.
Up to 20 inches by 2050. That's out of Jim O'Donnell out of Yukon Circa. Is sort of our technical lead in the state, if you will.
Is that for the New Haven too?
Yeah, for the Connecticut shoreline. That's really a big issue for us. We're a coastal community. We're in a sense paying a heavy price for the sins of everyone, even people who live thousands of miles from, or 1,000 miles from.
You talked about how this is different when you talk about existential threat, about like what's the crisis today. For instance, you've been working for years on a plan for Long Wharf, a plan for One Union Avenue. You have maps for coastal flooding all of the city so that even Beaver Hills, which isn't on the water, has to think about this. But you are also scrambling with the quote-unquote fire of the day.
Yes.
So there was an article, tell me if you think this was accurately portrayed in the media, said that 1/3 of the people in America in the last 3 months have experienced a weather crisis event. They've had to leave their homes because of wildfires that are going much farther than ever before and destroying entire village in one case. They're having flooding, flash flooding in Tennessee people don't even see coming, that destroys homes and turns roads into rivers. We had, since Hurricane Katrina, in some ways the worst storm in New Orleans. And then just a week ago, we thought we were going to get hit in New Haven. The major Deegan Expressway in New York was a river.
Yeah.
Is that accurate to say that we're all going to be living now every few months prepared for a possible crisis, like weather blows out at the last second, like happened with hurricane, the hurricane right before Ida, the one that hit Rhode Island instead of us,
right.
Henri,
yes.
Are we going to have to batten down the hatches every few months now?
I mean, predicting the weather is always a tricky thing, but certainly we see the longer term trends are towards more frequent, more severe weather events. So are we going to, over a period of time, have to batten down the hatches more often? Absolutely. The two-pronged challenge that we see in New Haven from climate change is the sea level rise, but also an increase in these high-intensity rain events. And we've had two of them this summer, Elsa and Ida, both of which caused extensive flooding, some of which flooded the same people twice.
Although in both cases, especially Ida, if we had been 50 miles away, it would have been much, much worse, right?
Right, yeah.
Like in New York and New Jersey, people's homes were destroyed, right? And thousands, millions of people, right, lost electricity. Right?
Yeah, and I think a lot of these issues are also hyper-local, right? Different parts of New Haven saw different amounts of rainfall, and substantially different amounts of rainfall.
Well, did we dodge a bullet with Henri and Ida the last month? I mean, because Henri, when I looked at the first map 3 days before, and you gave us that briefing, it showed it hitting New Haven. Like hitting New Haven.
Yes.
In which case, tens of thousands of people would have lost power, maybe for a week, right?
Yeah. I mean, Henri was no question a bullet dodged. I think both Elsa and Ida we took those. Could they have been worse? Sure. Could they have been a lot better? Absolutely. So I
noticed are the most of the trees that were going to fall down? I mean, there are always some ready to fall, but did we have a kind of pruning?
Well, neither were particularly high wind event days. I mean, really, the
summer 2020, right. We had that huge one. We had a 100-year tree fall.
Well, it was Isaias. That was a wind event, right? So we've seen. You sort of go through the different events that we've seen over the last 10 years or so. Sandy was a storm surge event. Really, that was one of the big things that we saw there, and some wind. Not so much on the rainfall. You look at Isaias, that was a real wind event. Elsa and Ida were really rainfall events, where we saw this large amount of water. And we've even seen a couple of, this was a year or two ago, Hamden had 8 inches of rain, right? These sort of hyper-local cells that dumped this huge amount of water.
Just like in 89 Hamden, the tornado touched down only in Hamden and nowhere else and wiped out a block.
Yes,
remember that?
I remember that.
I really think they're cursed.
Yeah, Hamden's my hometown where I grew up. I was a proud Green Dragon of Hamden High. So,
but I do think they seem to get hit by a lot more of those.
Yeah, I mean, growing up in Hamden, we always thought Wallingford got all the thunderstorms. They just passed right to the north.
But their electricity didn't come out because even though they're a Republican town, they have publicly owned municipal power.
Yes,
which is cheaper and stronger.
Oh yeah, it's the envy of the state, right?
Yeah, well, I wish we could have that. But anyway, we're talking to Giovanni Zinn. He's a city engineer. He's on the front lines of climate change. So he talked about when there's a big rain event, meaning a flood,
right?
Always correct. Middletown Avenue, it's going to flood under the highway. Quinnipiac Avenue, there's going to be flooding. Union Avenue and Long is going to be flooding. Right. But isn't it true that in this last storm, you put up roadblocks, right? You said, don't drive here in Middletown Avenue.
Yes.
And people drove around the roadblocks and got stuck and had to be towed out.
It is an amazing lesson in human behavior.
I mean, what do you pull your hair out saying, I'm up all night trying to keep people safe in New Haven? We both warned them with words. We put up a roadblock so they couldn't go there, and they still drove around and got stuck.
Yeah, I mean, it's, every time there's one of these events, I end up interacting with people who've had their vehicles destroyed in the flood, and they show a lot of regret, and I certainly don't blame them. And I feel bad for them. But on the other hand, don't drive in flooded streets. Don't drive around a police cruiser that has flashing lights that's clearly telling you don't keep going. If you drive around them and tried to forge your way through, don't be surprised if your engine destroys itself by taking in a bunch of water. And it's all fun and games as long as no one gets hurt. But there is the very, very serious possibility that someone does die because of this. I mean, we certainly saw with the I think there was a state trooper in Woodbury that got caught up in a flood.
Sad.
They're tragedies.
This is serious business. And
floods are tragedy.
And I think when my mind turned on this, I don't know if this was the same for you, it was 2010 to 2013, when all of a sudden we had 3 or 4 storms that were the kind you would get once every 40 years. I'm talking about a freak October snowstorm that the trees still had the leaves, so that pulled everything down. You had the biggest snow since the 1800s, Snowmageddon, with almost 3 feet, and a number of other snow events like that. So is cold weather going to be something to worry about more because then you have to add with the snowfall?
Well, that's certainly a possibility. I'm not a meteorologist, so to be frank, I think the summer rainfall has sort of been, the hurricane season rainfall has been one of our major focuses. But yeah, I think increasing snowfall and the challenge that we have when basic infrastructure such as our electric grid fails.
What are we doing about the electric grid?
Well, I mean,
Well, UI trim trees, and people were mad about that. 'Cause
Right.
That's a pro and con. We love trees too, and
Yes.
you need them for the climate, but you also don't need them falling on poles.
right. Yeah. I mean, I think it's a real challenge. It's regulated at the state level. I think partially by design. So the city does not have a particularly active role other than our role as the tree warden. And in advocating for the tree cover, which helps a lot with urban heat island effect, with reducing energy consumption. There's a lot of air quality, a lot of benefits for trees, right? And finding that balance can be so hard sometimes.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we're at a crossroads on two different fronts. One is the sort of the resilience side for the electric grid, and the second is obviously electric vehicles are going to mean a lot of different things for the electric grid.
What's it going to mean? We need more electricity to charge.
Yeah, I mean, like we were, I did an exercise a couple months ago, and we're thinking over what does it mean for our police cruiser fleet to become 100% electric, right?
Is that going to happen?
I think everyone's going to be electric in the next 10 years, right? I mean, Europe is banning combustion engines in 2035.
And all the major car companies are ramping it up.
I drive one of our city vehicles that's fully electric. It's great. I mean, you clearly are driving the future.
Can you go more than 50 miles?
Yeah, I think, we bought a... I don't go more than 50 miles. I mean, one of the nice things about Zoom is I don't think I've left the city on business in a very long time.
Nice.
And I'm looking forward to not having to do that. Travel time is obviously something that takes a lot of time.
Because when you have kids.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, it's looking at the police fleet, we got 50-something cars that are 3 shifts, and how do you charge all of that?
What did you decide?
Well, it's basically you'd have to use like a fast charger. A half hour gets you back to 80%. I mean, aside from the cost of that,
but by the time we're changed over, isn't the technology going to improve so that you will be able to charge faster?
Well, yes. I mean, but when you're charging faster, that increases your electricity draw. So suddenly, to charge our police fleet all at the same time on a fast charger, which is conceivable, it's a power draw of like 5 megawatts, which is similar to like our entire wastewater treatment plant. It's really one of the larger. It would be a very large user. Much more than our city buildings or something. One building like our city hall complex, for example.
So that'd be an example of a problem you haven't figured out yet, but you've identified.
Right. Yeah. So as we go forward, but I think that that's one small example, and
that's a good problem.
You pull that out, to look at the entirety of the grid and all the challenges that we're going to have as we make this big and very necessary transition to EVs. Couple that with the resilience, I think we're going to see big changes in our electric grid. They are, I don't know.
I want to ask you about that. So you might have noticed when I ask you questions, especially for articles, I really don't know what I'm talking about, the basics of engineering, right?
That's not true.
No, it is true, but that kind of helps me explain it to everybody else. If you can explain to me what you're good at, we can explain to you best. So here's something I'd like you to explain to me.
Sure.
We have a double threat for our electric grid. We have, besides the fact that we want it to be green to save the planet, we have the threat of storms that knock down wires, right, and people that endanger. And there's hacking, right? So we know that government, quasi-government, and rogue hackers around the world, in North Korea, Russia, Estonia, everywhere you look, they could shut down our grid.
Sure.
Why haven't we moved to microgrids? Why haven't we just had my neighborhood so now I have solar panels, right?
Yeah.
But I have to send that electricity back to UI. UI buys it retail, sends it back, and charges you wholesale. And they say that's for the good of the grid. We could talk about that another day. I think that's BS. But you also lose a lot of energy along the way and is still vulnerable to hackers and storms.
Right.
Why aren't we at completely localized, generated? Because, I mean, that could skip the whole thing about burying power lines, which is so expensive, but guards against the weather. Why aren't we doing that?
To be honest, I'm not an expert in that field, so much. I mean, we've obviously done a lot of projects around.
I don't mean to be a survivalist. I mean, I just don't understand why that isn't our plan.
Well, I think it's because the whole grid was built on this system of very large centralized power plants. It's
why aren't we ditching that? Is it too expensive?
I think it's just it's both expensive to do that, but I think there's also a lot of entrenched investments that are in those large centralized
inherited
assets.
by, in the case of UI, a Spanish energy giant, which has a pretty good green record, right? But but they really are. I would say they have too many friends in government who are looking out for their profits. No.
I think that's certainly a possibility.
What if a lot of us are getting solar? We
Yeah.
can get more. Why aren't we just having batteries that store it so that we don't have to send it back to a grid and have it be subject to shutdowns? I know we need the backup of a grid perhaps for ours fails, or if you have like 5 days of overcast skies.
Well, I actually installed a solar array myself on my house this last, actually it was December, right before the weather turned. I didn't want to be on my roof in the cold, but I looked at batteries. I mean, it's just a question of cost still on batteries.
Do you think that'll come down in 5 years?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. I mean, I think
so. If you have a backup generator and a battery,
right,
will we need to be on the grid?
I think there's certain times when you do, I mean, another big push is for building electrification, right? For climate change, right? To get away from natural gas and from fossil fuels.
So we want more electricity used now. And some of us would argue nuclear power because then environmentalists are against nuclear power because of the waste and the potential danger. But other people say, in fact, if it's done right, it's the cleanest. Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, I think one of the challenges you have is that the cleaner technologies in the home rely on electricity. So we're trying to push those, and at the same time, we're also trying to, have things like battery backup, and the size of your equipment just keeps going up and up and up, for battery backup
and then there'll be
inverters
too,
and all that.
Whether it'll be for the metals or for the actual parts.
Yeah, I mean, you could secure them in your basement.
We
so
are
getting
to
stuff
survivalist scheme here now. We got our rifles and don't come near our house, but But won't the cost for that come down too?
I think a lot of the costs will come down.
Now, here's a crazy idea. Could the police electric vehicles have solar roofs?
I mean, they could. I think some of the manufacturers have done it. It's a more or less an inconsequential amount of energy compared to the quantity of energy that the car needs.
All right. So now I'd like to bring it right back to Earth because we got Giovanni Zinn, who's at Ground Zero location Earth at all the storms and other climate change challenges facing New Haven. You're listening to us on Dateline New Haven, WNHH FM, New Haven's home for community radio. So, Giovanni, we talked about, we've been talking about resilience. That's a word for how we're going to still be around when those sea levels rise. Will there be a Morris Cove in 2050? Will there be an airport?
Well, that's an interesting question. You said the A word there, right? The airport. It's a concern, right? I mean, everyone talks about how low the airport is. I think there's less discussion about the fact that the neighborhood right next to it is basically at the same level, within inches in certain spots of the airport. It's a real challenge. I think.
What level is it at?
The lowest spot in the neighborhood is the intersection of Morris Causeway and Concord, and the catch basin top there is just below elevation 4. So,
what does that mean?
It means that, in a very high tide, like a lunar high tide right now, the harbor is at the level of the catch basin. So, there's a tide gate, right, that really changes all of this. So if you look at the inundation maps that FEMA publishes and, a lot of other places publish, they show all of that area flooding now regularly, not only the airport, but also the neighborhood.
So can we build protections so that for 100 years we're okay, or should we more intelligently just move people out?
Well, I think that's one of the big challenges we have, right? Globally, talking about this issue in coastal communities. I think there's certainly a thread where people say you have to just pull back. It's no longer sustainable. I think in New Haven, we have a challenge, right? Climate is a huge challenge. It's not the only challenge. It's providing housing for our affordable housing for our people, jobs, economic opportunity, and I think a lot of the sort of strategic value of New Haven is the fact that it's a coastal community. It's at the center of a bunch of transportation networks. So I don't think pulling back necessarily is the correct answer.
We can protect ourselves. We can build enough protection so that even Morris Causeway will be a viable place to live in 2040?
I think there are ways of doing that. I think the big challenge is going to be, how do we fund all of that? How do we pay for all of these different issues, right?
The word is infrastructure. When we're talking about the politics of what's going on in Washington, you're talking about your livelihood, right?
Right.
How do we build stuff so that we don't flood?
Right, exactly. And how do we show New Haven's value as we compete against every other coastal community? We look at, if you look at Long Wharf, the Army Corps has selected us as part of their feasibility study of New Haven and Fairfield counties. They selected Long Wharf as the project to go forward for protection.
Tell us what that project is.
So that project essentially has three elements. One is building a flood wall along I-95 to protect the I-95, the Long Wharf district that's between the I-95 and the rail yard, and then the rail yard, and then even a little bit beyond.
That's important.
So that's element one, yes.
Trains can run, cars can move. People can work and live.
And, the Long Wharf Responsible Growth Plan, talks about the value of this district.
You also have very good drawings in that plan.
Yeah, I got to say, hand it to my friends in City Plan. They do beautiful renderings.
We love running the stories, comedy, so we can run those drawings because you can see what you're talking about.
Right. And then, element number two is a large pump station, 1,000 cubic feet per second. It's a huge amount of water that we have to pump out. There are times when water will be high in the harbor and water just has nowhere to go.
What can we pump now?
I'm sorry.
How many cubic feet per second can we pump?
Well, we don't have a stormwater pump.
We don't have any stormwater pump.
Right now we're relying on gravity. And, as the sea level rises, we talk about gravity. Water flows downhill, right? If you get rid of your hill, the water doesn't flow anywhere. So you then are stuck using a pump that, essentially creates a hill.
This is part of why the police can't leave the police station, the train station when it rains hard.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I mean, and especially when there's high tide. Union Avenue, there's at elevation 8. In a storm, you see, storm surge, not crazy storm surge. You're elevation 5, 6, even up to 7. And suddenly, what is usually 5-6 foot drop at normal high tide.
So, do you guys, in advance of a bigger storm, move the police cruisers somewhere else?
We do move some of our assets into the garage at Union Station because you can get out the other way. The police do have ways of moving things around, but it's a challenging spot. And it's a challenge also because that entire district is a place of growth in New Haven, a place for economic opportunity.
And theoretically, they were going to rebuild the Church Street South, right?
Right. Yeah. So there's, I think they're talking hundreds of units there of, also of affordable housing.
And what's the third element of this long plan?
It's gates at the opening at the highway and the underpasses, right? So water can get under the underpasses at Brewery, at Canal Dock, and Long Wharf Drive. So be able to close those off so water can't get under the highway.
Gates you can close off, but where does the water go, though?
Well, it just stays in the harbor, right? But the volume of water in the harbor is so much larger than the volume that you have going into Long Wharf, even though it would destroy Long Wharf.
So these three projects, how much does it cost?
Right now, the Army Corps is looking at $130 million.
And when is it being built?
Well, that remains to be seen, right? It has to get funded first.
Oh, they haven't funded it?
They haven't fully funded it. No, they've funded their work. They have the first year of design funded. So that's going to start here in 2022, hopefully. And then sort of there's a multi-year design process and then construction probably in the mid to late 2020s.
So we're a decade away.
Sorry?
We're a decade away.
Where did what get it?
We're a decade away from
we're a decade away. Built. Yes.
So what are we going to do in the meantime?
I mean, what we currently do, right?
And what do we do besides begging people not to drive into floods?
I think there's that. Certainly as we see redevelopment, you have to follow our redevelopment standards, build to the base flood elevation +1, looking at ways to strengthen that.
Can you walk me through that again? Because, again, people like me don't really know baseline elevation.
Right. So, per building code and our flood management regulations, if you're, say, in a flood district, you have to build where your finished floor elevation is above the base flood elevation. So FEMA publishes a map that says, and I'm making up numbers here, but, in Long Wharf District, you have a flood elevation of elevation 12, right? So you would have to build your floor at elevation 13.
Is that already outdated? Are we now going to once a year be above 13?
Well, I think as you see FEMA revising flood maps, that goes up. No, we haven't seen elevation 12 is a 100-year flood, and we haven't seen that.
We just had the 100-year flood in New York and New Jersey, and it missed us by like 50 miles.
Well, I think that was a rainfall as opposed to storm surge.
I see what you're saying.
So a storm surge is to elevation 12. Rainfall.
So you feel like we can live in the future on the East Shore and even have Tweed? We just have to fight for the infrastructure dollars to protect them.
Yes, I think that's the big question: is how do we show New Haven is something that deserves the investment to be protected. And how do we invest ourselves now and do the little things now that, sort of will save us the big bucks down the line?
So what's some of the other little things we do now besides building the floor elevation?
Well, I think it's a lot of how we deal with stormwater, encouraging stormwater infiltration. I think we've been very successful in New Haven through both in the public right-of-way and our bioswales, but also in our regulations.
Now, are the bioswales make a difference? I mean, obviously we love bioswales, right?
Yes.
Bioswales are where you have a little plot of dirt by the road, where you have plants and instead of grass there, and it absorbs the rainwater so it doesn't flood the streets. And we became Bioswale City in the last 5 years. I mean, this must have been one of the most fun part of your jobs. And we even got people from Emerge who came out of prison, the Emerge program, to build them and learn how to do them.
Yeah.
And what a great thing. How many do we have now?
I think we're getting close to 300.
Wow. So does that add up enough that it prevents floods?
It certainly helps. We had the Yale School of Forestry, Dr. Gabe Benoit, look at it. He did pre and post testing. I think I actually saw him out on where was he? Right out here on Orange Street, looking at one of his sensors yesterday. And he's looked at it, and yes, they do make a measurable difference and a significant difference. Obviously that varies.
I always feel like I'm singing Kumbaya when I'm going through because it sounds too good to be true. How the good ways a bioswale improves the city. Like, you just go on West Park Avenue, aren't there like 3 in a few blocks?
Yeah, that was actually one of the first sites, a pilot site, and that one was extensively studied by the Yale School of Forestry, and they found that to be pretty effective. I think the benefit there is that you're preventing water from entering our system at all, and so that the capacity that we do have is diminished as it sometimes is.
And is there also an issue with, like, so you can't go in the water for a few days after a big storm because the sewage goes into the recreational areas? What is the status of our separated sewers? I remember we were building more separation.
Right. So Greater New Haven Water Pollution Control Authority is the lead agency on that. They're the ones that are under the consent order, not the city. They have the long-term control plan, which is a 20-year plan to go through all of the city and separate it. But this is a problem that stays with us. The consent order from EPA says that you have to separate the sewers for what's called a 2-year, 6-hour storm. So that's a storm that has a 1 in 50 chance of happening in any particular year. It's a fairly typical storm. 1 in 50, that sounds wrong. No. I'm sorry, I'm not doing my math. It has a 50% chance. There we go. 50% chance. Got my math flipped, though. 1 in 2 chance. Yeah, that's a little different. A 1 in 2 chance of happening in a particular year, and then they have to control overflows for that.
So how are we doing with overflows, like around the city?
I mean, they still happen. They're going down, is my understanding. Am I right?
Is that what I see when I walk almost every day in Edgewood Park? And some days I see after a storm really scummy water near the channels and the duck pond.
It could be.
That's coming from the harbor, though, too.
Right. I mean, there's a lot of natural processes as well that create scum. There's tannins and other things that kind of create that. So that's going down. However, in these larger storm events, say an Ida or an Elsa, those are way beyond a 2-year, 6-hour storm event. So that's something where we still will see CSOs into the future, even after this 20-year plan.
Wow.
So it's something
we're going to
that
see a lot more of those
sticks with
storms.
us. Yeah.
All right. Aaron Good has a question. I'm going to try to read it here because I just got to scroll it a little bit. When will the Grand Avenue... I'm sorry, there's another thing that's blocking my view of this photo. When will the Grand Avenue Bridge be reopened? When will the work along the Farmington Canal at the Learning Corridor be completed? When will we be getting raised intersections at the Farmington Canal at grade intersections? So start with Grand Avenue Bridge.
Grand Avenue Bridge, we are...
And by the way, you got the Chop Street Bridge open in 3 days. Good job.
Yes.
You found that part that you talked about. Yeah.
The Grand Avenue Bridge was scheduled to be complete again right at the end of this year. We are still on schedule, despite the pandemic, to open in January.
Mm-hmm. With the democratically selected color.
With the democratically ranked choice voting selected color.
That was so much fun. Yeah.
Yes. So that is that project has been on schedule. We started days before the pandemic started. I remember being on the bridge. I think it was the 7th of March, we had our block party, right?
I remember that. The last time everyone was out in public for a while.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we're not shaking hands at that point, but that was about it.
Wow, so March 7th we knew that. Okay.
Yeah, that's I'm pretty sure it was March 7th. But
now we found out shaking hands is fine. We just can't sneeze on each other.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So that's on track. We'll be probably closed for a day or two in April just to put the overlay because we can't do that in the winter. But it's I think the bridge is turning out beautifully. We're excited about the project and have a long life ahead of it for that.
Work along the learning corridor is the place by West Hazel Street and Shelton Avenue. That is one of the great spots in New Haven. It used to be the mud hole in the 90s,
Yes.
80s, big drug dealing place. Now it's been reclaimed by the community, all these green spaces, community gardens. I was there the other day just seeing like 20 camp kids doing something with people.
Oh yeah, no, it's a fantastic place.
So what's the work being done along the Farmington Canal there?
So we have to connect an electric service, and we're working with our good friends at Parks and Public Works to get that scheduled. I hope to do that shortly.
And why do you want electric service on the trail?
For the lights and also for events. We're also extending the lighting down the canal line 2 extra blocks.
That's a good idea.
Yep, and we're going to try to work our way up and down the canal line and have lighting. We've got those lights on order. They're
Have you hit the supply chain problem?
Oh, 100%. Yes, supply chain problems are huge. So we're looking at probably the end of the year to get those in.
Okay.
So that work is continuing. And then I think the third one was, you had one other question.
When will the raised intersections for the Farmington Canal at grade intersections be there?
So we're mostly through our design. It's a joint project with Hamden, so I got to check with Hamden on their timeline as well. I think they were trying to approve some capital funds for their match. We have our funds for our match. So I'll follow up.
Doesn't really have any money. Like if you look in their wallet, it's a big hole.
Yeah, that's what I've heard. I've read your coverage.
I gotta tell you, I think that I gotta believe that one way you do your job better is Aaron Good.
Oh, 100%.
That guy pays such great attention to many important things around town that the rest of us can't
His
keep
Twitter
track
feed
of.
is required reading.
It is really great. It's one of the best publications in town about commentary and facts. And it picks out while testimonies going on at the legislature or historic. Yeah, Aaron, thank you for that question, and thanks for keeping everybody on their toes. And we're doing that here on Dateline New Haven, WNHH-FM, New Haven's home for community radio. We had the pleasure today to talk about disaster after disaster after disaster after looming disaster of climate change with Giovanni Zinn, the guy who gets to be up day and night worrying about it and keeping us safe. Giovanni, is this what you want to do when you were like 10?
You're making me feel so good about what I do, right? It's like, it's just doomsday,
Actually, we're going to get to why it's the opposite. But anyway, did you want to do this when you were in Hampton?
So, I always loved the environment, right? I got a love for the environment actually from my older brother, and it's...
Did you go to like Sleeping Giant and stuff?
Oh, yeah. And I actually remember my first engagement ever in New Haven civic life, and I was probably in, second or third, or I forget how old I was. It was, I don't know if you remember the, what was the name of that? It was in New Haven, like in the early 90s. They had this whole process, Vision
Trail. Which I thought was hilarious. It was part of...
it was part of...
That was our early version of like having a walking trail that gets you under the highway by the train station so that you can walk through connecting cities that you didn't... parts of the city that you didn't realize were close together so you don't have to drive.
Right,
But then they put fences back up. I used to be like the only person for 3 days who would ride his bike under the trail there by the Brewery Street. And then they put the fences back up.
Yeah, no, Vision Trail, unfortunately, is no more through the rail yard, right?
But it was supposed to be how we're revisiting it. But then we got the Farmington Trail.
But there was this whole process, and I forget the name. Name's slipping me right now. Of revisioning New Haven,
right?
I remember going to... to one of the meetings about the environment.
Second grade, you did
I was
that?
really young. I was I forget when it was. Do you remember when that was exactly? I could tell you.
I covered it. Yeah, it was the early 90s.
Yeah, so I was probably, 9 or 10.
93, 94.
Yeah, so I was probably about 10, and I remember going
you were
to my
10
older
years old going to something like that instead of watching cartoons?
Yeah, no.
And you could understand what they were talking about?
Yeah, I mean, my big suggestion, if I remember correctly, was to expand recyclables. So, that was like all about that back then. It was so fun.
Did you foresee that China was going to stop accepting our recyclables?
No, I did not.
Dirty, then we'd have to dump it on streets in Asia.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, now I feel a little better. But
yeah, no, it's been something I've always wanted to do.
What got you at 10 years old to show up at a...
I just tagged along with my brother and my parents, and it was...
So they're kind of environmentalists?
Yeah, I mean, they were active in sort of civic issues and stuff, and it was a big thing. I think it was an exciting time in New Haven at the time, from what I remember.
What's so funny is there was 8 million studies about how to make New Haven a whole different kind of place. And, we made fun of it at the time, but New Haven did become a different place.
Yeah.
New Haven is a much different place from the 90s.
It is.
There's much more. I mean, the Farmington Canal is just the beginning of it.
Yeah.
In terms of the civic engagement, whether it's arts, environment,
management. As someone who was born in New Haven Hospital, it's really a wonderful place.
10 years old, you're into environment. Were you also into hiking and camping and stuff?
A little bit, yeah. I mean, I don't think my parents weren't really into some of that stuff. My parents were astronomers, so I was really into the stars, and using my telescope and all that stuff. And I remember, Comet Hale-Bopp, taking pictures and all of that kind of thing.
And when did you say, I have an idea what I'd like to do with my life with this?
I think it was in college, actually. I mean, I always knew I wanted to go into, the sciences, right? I grew up in a very scientific household, and engineering.
Did you figure out how the toaster worked when you were 12?
Yeah, I always liked pulling stuff apart. I was very sort of practically minded, and working with tools and stuff. Like my favorite class in high school was home repair, right? Strangely enough,
cool. It's not strange.
So so I think engineering is a very good mix of the science, right? And I think to understand climate, you have to understand the science, and the science is really what guides us. And also there's the practical application. And I think working in engineering in the city really is the confluence of a lot of these different things: the science, the technical.
Did you do this right out of college?
Yeah. I was an intern. Yep, in the planning department right after college. And
Giovanni,
then I was
that's a
gone
great
for 8
story.
months, and then I was back basically.
What year are we talking about?
2005.
Okay, so it's the DeStefano administration.
Yep.
And 2006, I believe it was, or 2005 was when he got reborn as an environmentalist. So all of a sudden, he got his Prius.
Right, yeah, that was
and
right
he was
around
running
that
for
time.
governor as the Green governor.
Yep.
And so you kind of came at the ground floor when New Haven decided, and it was also because the Green Party had won some elections in 2001.
Right.
So all of a sudden, Democratic Party decided they had to reinvent themselves as green because people liked that they rode their bikes around.
Yeah, I think there's also some very environmentally minded folks that came into City Hall. Mike Piscatelli,
right?
Had started that and started a lot of wonderful work. With Karen Gilvarg in the planning department around. Doing our greenhouse gas inventory, then our air toxics inventory.
So
our
you came into the
plan.
city plan department? That's
I was an intern there, and then I was away. I was doing environmental consulting for 10 months, and then there was an opportunity to come back under contract to work on some EPA grants, and the rest is history, as they say.
And has it always been the engineering department?
No, that was in planning. Then I was in the Office of Sustainability for a couple of years, from 2010 to 12.
So your timing was good. You entered adult work career at the time New Haven entered the green era.
Yeah, I think you
and what
say
did you
that.
work on? Bike lanes. Remember we started with sharrows, which now I think
Yes.
were well-intentioned and absolutely horrible idea. And then painted bike lanes, which everyone parks in or opens the doors in. So
Right.
and then people like me ride the wrong way in, so that's actually not okay either.
Yeah, I mean, I think protected infrastructure is the future, and it's certainly what we hear from our community. I think it's a challenge in a city that's already built. You look at the design manuals and they show these, 80, 100-foot right-of-ways out west that, you can fill with all sorts of goodies. And the challenge we have here that everything's a lot smaller and tighter. But, I think we're starting to really gain some traction on it.
I watched you spend years with neighbors who were resistant so that you could plan a protected bikeway from Forest Road to all the way down Edgewood Avenue to where it ends at Park.
Yeah.
That was complicated. You had to talk to people how you're going to get up on their sidewalks. That took years, but now you're getting it built.
Yeah, it's getting built.
When's it going to be done?
I think we're going to be done with the civil construction here in probably about a month and a half.
Really? Because there's only 2 or 3 spots where you're working now.
Well, we're going through all so this is the civil construction, then we have to do all the signal work. And that actually has been something that's been a challenge with COVID and all of the extremely long lead times. You're getting lead times in the 20s and 30s of weeks. So, that's always been that's a
What do you
real
mean lead
challenge.
times, when you can get materials or people?
So you order it now and you get it 25 weeks later.
But this is going to be a protected two-way track.
Correct.
So,
Yep.
like, I'm looking, let's say, at Dwight and Edgewood.
Yes.
I can't figure out what they're building there. They're just moving out the sidewalk. How's that a cycle track?
Right. So then it's 2 lanes. It'll be 1 travel lane, and it'll be a cycle track right next to the north curb.
But why are they pulling it out? Why are you taking away more of the street?
Well, it's not just a cycle track, right? This is also pedestrian improvements.
Okay.
So, all those intersections in the eastern part of Edgewood Avenue didn't have crosswalk signals. Also, Dwight and Edgewood had a very long crossing distance, had this sort of sea of asphalt. Right?
And you have people who are disabled and stuff.
Right,
And a
yeah.
lot of pedestrian traffic.
And so you're asking people to, you have a lot of neighbors talk about speeding there, and you have people that are having to cross these very long distances in
And then by the
crosswalks
Edgewood Mall, they
while
call
people
it,
speed,
which is that great greenway where
Yep.
all these apple trees. My daughter discovered with me the other day.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that blooming apples there. I noticed you're doing the same kind of work. I'm trying to think. Is it not Ellsworth? It's like
Yeah, I forget all the different which intersection we're on right now. I think we're at Norton now, if I remember correctly.
And what are you doing there? Is that again where you're cutting into the road?
So there we're putting in walk signals, I believe.
All right. And Giovanni's in, and Dolores, Deloy, Lois, Kimbrough. Thank you for listening. When are you coming to the neighborhoods? I think that means like neighborhood meetings. You go to management. Actually, you have teams in neighborhoods that we've covered, whether it's West Hills, Fairhaven, East Shore, where you actually have teams of citizens advising you on how to make streets safer, correct?
Right. Yes. So, we're doing the Safe Routes for All projects. We also have our major corridors project, where we're going to neighborhoods that have some of our larger arterials.
That's what I'm talking
ways
about.
To
Yeah,
redo those.
it's like whether it's Valley Road,
anyone.
Street, yeah.
I'm happy to come see anyone. So
Now, how are those going?
Please reach out.
Are
They're going well. I mean, I think they're very well received. There's a lot of design challenges around them. I was just walking Whitney Avenue the other day, and there's a big giant AT&T duck bank right where we wanted to put a curb. So you have to keep adjusting and moving things and understanding. There's a lot of congestion in our roads. But in terms of utilities,
and as you said,
that's
also
one of the bigger
built from another
challenges.
era. Do you have a fundamental belief, Giovanni Zinn, that changing the built environment will change behavior? People drive like maniacs, pedestrians. We don't pay enough attention to our bikes.
Yeah.
Will we do better if you build things better?
Yeah, I think so. I honestly do believe so. We often look at not for everyone. I think there is we talk about the 3 E's of traffic calming: education, enforcement, and engineering. Engineering is one part of that tripod. And we look at what's called the 80th percentile speed. What speed people drive, 80% of people drive at or less, right? So if you have an 80th percentile speed of 25 miles an hour, that means that 80% of the drivers are driving the speed limit. That last 20%, right, that really becomes an education and enforcement issue.
So like right now, and I guess folks in Westville, I walk there a lot, there are several parts of Yale Avenue that are treacherous. So
Right.
it winds around wide.
Yeah.
So you've built all these changes across from Edgewood School, where the lanes are narrower, and people are going to have to learn to park sort of in the middle of the car traffic, and then to the side, pedestrian, bike. But then the neighborhood, and I don't think it was the neighborhood, it wasn't just like 2 or 3 people said don't put rubber duckies up because they look ugly.
There was a number of people who did that.
So then how are you going to actually get people to park where you want them to park so you can walk to the side of that?
I think a lot of people have figured it out at this point, is what I'm hearing from the road. Are there still people that are parking in wrong spots? Sure. I think that becomes
I've actually
an
been using the bike and
enforcement.
walking. I really like it. And thank you.
Yeah. No, I think it works. I mean, there you had a road that was extremely wide. It had bike lanes that were just sort of traditional striped bike lanes between the parking lane and the traffic. So you had on one hand, people opening their doors. On the other hand, you had people speeding by. There wasn't a ton of bike traffic, so oftentimes people saw a travel lane that was probably 16 feet wide, so very wide, very flat, great sight lines, Modern cars can go very fast. I think that's a challenge, is that, cars years ago were less capable than what they do now.
So my one corner that I consider the most dangerous.
Yes.
You're a block from the boulevard going west.
Okay.
On Whaley.
Mm-hmm.
And you're going on the first entrance to Blake Street.
Yes.
That sweeps on a curve towards, so it's like double the size of a usual entrance. So when I walk in the middle of that block, when I start to walk, I look back and there are no cars coming. They come so fast, like 60, 80 miles an hour. They're not looking, they're texting. There's no way for a pedestrian not to be in the middle of the road and get killed. I can't tell you how many times I almost got killed, even on a bike on that.
This was crossing Blake Street or crossing Whaley?
Crossing Blake on Whaley.
Okay.
You know how it sweeps in at a curve? And that's all about the infrastructure, because sometimes people notice they almost killed you and they're like, they're sorry.
Well, I think that's the importance of intersection design.
So if there were 90% angle,
I think,
but can you do that if it's a state road?
Well, that's the challenge, right? Looking at what we can do and can't do because it's a state road. Certainly similar intersections designs. If you look at Quinnipiac and Hemingway, for example, similar, people can take a big sweeping turn. We did a temporary project with paint and delineators that I think was successful in necking that down. The permanent project that we're looking for 2022 on Quinnipiac Avenue permanently brings that neck down and to a 90-degree angle.
And you can do that on a state road.
Well, Quinnipiac Avenue is a city road.
Okay, and then on this case, it's Blake City, so you can go a few
Blake
feet.
is city.
Could you go a few feet in and make the 90% there?
It's possible. I think you want to make sure that there aren't any weird jogs or anything like that you have to do. And, as much as I love designing on the fly, it usually gets me in trouble. But
I mean, not in trouble, but you're on Dateline New Haven, WNHHF, Giovanni Zinn. We just have a few minutes left. Tell me quickly about solar roofs and solar power in city buildings. Since you've been engineer, and before that, I think when you're assistant or whatever,
right?
You've converted a lot of the city's buildings.
Yeah, we've got
to solar power. Tell me about that.
We've gotten about 3 megawatts of solar power on our roofs, schools mostly, in the sort of, and we've done it through public-private partnerships where the city locks in an electric rate for 15 to 20 years. And buys the power from the owner of the array,
which is
in our case, it's a tangle of LLCs usually, but Tesla. It was a precursor to Tesla that did sort of the first round.
And what happens in 15, 20 years?
It's there. They have to take them off the roof, or we can come to some sort of renegotiate some sort of arrangement. I mean, if the panels are long since paid for at that point,
and they don't go into the grid.
They do. I mean, they're net metered, right? So that means that the school sort of takes the power first, right? So usually schools consume plenty of electricity, and there's probably few times when the panels are really exporting a ton of power out of the schools, as opposed to your house where the annualized production of your solar array on your house is probably matches or is very close to what you use in a year. School, you're talking about 5-10%, something like that. So schools are very hungry for power, and so they tend to use it first. But what's nice about net metering and why that works very well is that we're able to take credit for the entire retail cost of the electricity. So that's not just the generation cost, it's also the transmission and distribution cost. Oppose that to, say, putting a solar array on an empty piece of land, then you're sort of just stuck selling the generation costs into the grid, and you don't get the transmission distribution.
Q-House.
Yes.
You have played a big role in that.
We are days away from actually taking, finishing the construction. Then we have to outfit it, right, with furniture and all of that.
When's it going to be open?
That is not for me to announce. I'll put it that way. Very shortly, though.
Like next week, or people going to be going?
No, I mean, I think one of the challenges that COVID has actually thrown is, first of all the supply chain issues. But one of the supply chains that's really rough right now is actually the furniture supply chain. So we're, I think, getting our first deliveries next week. But it's we've got a few week process here of getting our furniture and stuff that was supposed to arrive 2 weeks ago is now shipping next week, and it's been a real challenge. Both not only in terms of the manufacturer, but also the trucking shortage that the country's having right now.
All right, and then tell me, how can people make a killing on climate change? What's going to be the investments that in the new technology that help us deal in 20 years with how to live with flooding and fires and wind and
Yeah, I really don't know, Paul. It's we were talking about it earlier a little bit, I think your point that it's probably not going to be the good guys that make the killing. While cynical,
hedge funds and oil companies.
Yeah, I kind of feel that a bit myself, but I think it's less about making the killing. It's about finding creative ways to deal with it, and to make sure that it doesn't stop everything else.
And is it worth it? The way your job has become more intense than you could have ever imagined. Do you like doing this job? Do you see yourself doing it a long time?
I do love being in the public sector. I think you get to deal with a wide range of questions and problems that you wouldn't necessarily get, and I think there's the human aspect to your work that is very different from, say, a for-profit area. So I really do love it.
And you get to fix things.
Yeah, no,
your job is solving problems.
It is, hopefully.
Isn't that nice?
I know there's a lot more problems to solve, and I got to keep getting up and trying to solve more.
You get a bridge put back in place. You get a street so people can drive on it. You get places people can walk and bike. You get sun powering buildings so that our planet can be saved. I mean, that's not shabby.
Yeah. No, there are many wonderful things about this work, and I do love it. Thank you.
Well, I am so appreciative that you took an hour off that work, Giovanni, to fill us in. We should get back to Infrastructure Thursday. I guess you don't have Doug anymore in that job. But
yeah, but we'll figure something out.
All right, that's a great idea. Giovanni Zinn, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Paul. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, people, for listening today. This is Paul Bass, inviting you to fly free with us. We're going to take it out with the Afro-Semitic Experience, performing I Wish I Knew How It Would Feel to Be Free from the group CD, A Plea for Peace. Fly free with us all day and all night. WNHH, New Haven's home for community radio.